Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video. You will see that Module 2 is titled Climate Change and Forests, and this is the only module where we focus directly on climate change. In this video, we'll cover some general background on climate change. The next video, we'll dive into how climate change specifically affects forests, and we will wrap up the module with a look at landowner perspectives. This presentation is designed to help you feel more confident discussing climate change with landowners. So if that's new territory for you, we will share some practical tips and approaches you can use in those conversations. So let's go ahead and get started with understanding the language being used around climate change. Unfortunately, the language is overall kind of a doomsday narrative. In environmental education, we understand that it actually prohibits people from learning. It is very hard to be open-minded and learn about something that seems to be a threat because everything in popular media says you should be concerned now. So, I like to use phrases with a little bit of a more positive tone, like building a stable climate for brighter futures. This is much more optimistic. It is acknowledging that we need to help manage our climate and that it's future-oriented. So this is something to keep in mind when you put together your presentations. I have been guilty of putting combating climate change on my talks, and I kind of step away from that. Just recognizing that an aggressive tone at the very beginning can be very difficult for people. Here are some tips when it comes to talking about climate change with landowners. First, don't assume the term climate change will automatically turn people off. In fact, research shows that older adults who make up the majority of forest landowners often respond differently than younger generations. While younger folks may express more anxiety or anger, older landowners tend to have a more fatalistic outlook. That's not apathy. It's shaped by having lived through multiple crises. Many take a "we will get through this" attitude. So if you mention climate change and don't get a strong emotional reaction, don't panic. That said, always be aware of your audience. Most landowners are primarily interested in forest health, carbon payment, and practical management, not a climate science lecture. So climate change may come later in the conversation, not right at the start. Now, here's some encouraging data. In our Climate Smart Forest Legacy program, a peer-led learning group for forest landowners, we saw clear positive shifts. After reading science-based articles and discussing them together, participants' attitudes toward learning about climate change jumped significantly. On a 5-point scale, their interest rose from a neutral 3 to nearly 4.7. They also reported greater confidence in their ability to talk about climate strategies and share what they learned. That peer setting gave them a safe, supportive space to explore new ideas. So a takeaway here is, we don't need to tiptoe around climate change. We just need to be thoughtful, meet people where they are, and create space for real conversation. Let's move into some key definitions around climate change. Some of you may already know this well, but for those newer to the topic or looking for ways to explain it to landowners, here are a few simple distinctions. First, it's important to understand the difference between weather and climate. These terms are related but not the same. Weather describes the short-term state of the atmosphere, what's happening today, this week, or over a few weeks. Climate, on the other hand, refers to the average weather patterns over a long period, decades, or even centuries. It's about trends, not daily changes. Then there's a global warming, which is the observed rise in average global temperatures. But this doesn't mean every place warms equally. Polar regions, for example, are warming faster than the tropics. I think of this like gears turning. Warming is the driver that changes the behavior of weather over time. So climate change is a shift from what we have considered normal weather patterns to more extreme or unusual patterns. Heat waves, longer droughts, stronger storms, and so on. People may not see global temperature data for themselves, but they do notice when the weather feels different. That's why forests are such a powerful teaching tool. They offer visual, real-world signs of these changes that landowners can observe and connect to. There are three factors that can create the warming effect that you should be able to communicate within your presentations. One is that warming occurs in the atmosphere, and so there are greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. A really important greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. These greenhouse gases act like a blanket on planet Earth. We need a blanket to keep us warm, and it is important for human survival. But it is only when there's too much carbon that it becomes a problem. Second, the amount of greenhouse gases changes over time, and this is driven by natural processes. One of those natural processes happens in the forest. So forests can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis and will release that carbon dioxide back through combustion or decay. So there's a cycle with forests in terms of taking in oxygen and releasing it. This system can be altered depending on how that forest is managed. This can determine if that forest functions as a carbon source or a carbon sink. And so forests on their own are not necessarily a net positive place to put carbon unless they're managed to do so. This is a critical part of talking about the carbon market because carbon markets are effectively looking for ways to increase carbon storage in forests compared to a baseline, or compared to a counterfactual outcome. Forests are dynamic systems. They're constantly fluctuating. They gain and lose carbon on a daily, annual, or even decadal basis. These natural fluctuations are always present, which makes understanding forest carbon stocks a bit tricky. However, when landowners engage in carbon markets or forest management, the goal is to store more carbon in the forest over time. What we're really trying to achieve is an increase in the average amount of carbon in the forest, above and beyond what will have occurred without any management at all. So it's about understanding and managing those fluctuations to ensure the forest is continuously accumulating more carbon than it's losing. Over time, this results in greater carbon storage and contributes positively to climate change mitigation. The third factor to consider is the role of humans in creating this warming effect. We all enjoy the comforts and conveniences that come with modern energy use, but it's important to remember that the energy we consume often comes from fossil fuels. Biomass from ancient forests, fossil fuels, formed from ancient trees over millions of years. These are now being dug up and burned, releasing carbon into the atmosphere. This carbon was originally stored in the earth, but now, through combustion, is being released at a much faster rate than natural systems can absorb it. The result is more carbon in the atmosphere, which contributes to the warming effect. Once released, there's no natural mechanism in place to pull that carbon back out quickly, which brings us to the issue of socially undesirable concentrations of carbon dioxide. It's essential to recognize that pollution, whether it's carbon emissions, water quality, or air quality, is a social construct. Society collectively decides what is considered an acceptable level of pollution, and this decision involves real trade-offs. For instance, I love having air conditioning, and I'm sure many of you do too. Even though I teach about climate science and the impacts of carbon emissions, I personally enjoy the convenience of traveling to visit family in other states. So, while we know that there's climate costs associated with discomforts, the aim is to find a balance, an acceptable level of pollution that allows us to maintain our lifestyles while mitigating environmental health. A helpful way to put this into perspective is a quote from Melissa. The average US citizen needs about 10 acres of forest to offset their annual carbon footprint. Now, let's be optimistic. If you own more than 10 acres of forest, congratulations. You're already at net zero in terms of carbon offset. But here's a challenge. If we were to evenly divide all the forest land among every citizen in the US, there will be only about 3 acres of forest per person. So forests alone cannot be the ultimate solution to climate change. There's not enough forest land to go around. We must use our forests for other purposes too, such as timber, biodiversity, recreation, and more. Therefore, we need to integrate those forest management into climate change solutions thoughtfully, as forests are just one piece of a much broader puzzle. In summary, when engaging with climate change topics, it is helpful to talk about it in a way that makes landowners more hopeful. There's a lot of negativity in the news, so it is best to avoid it. Another important thing is being able to explain how climate change is caused and what the different sources of emissions are. It is also helpful to be able to explain what the role of forests are in carbon sinks. Finally, we have a few reflection questions for you to think about after today's session. These questions are really just an invitation to think about how you have been addressing climate change in the past and how you might want to reshape your definitions. As we continue to go through Module 2, we will show you more tips for how to engage landowners on these topics. So we hope you enjoyed today's video and that you are starting to feel more comfortable talking about climate change. If you're watching this video on YouTube, we encourage you to check out our free online educator course. If you are taking the course, here are a few reminders for you. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A forum on the classroom page. Remember to fill out the survey if you want credits and to complete a comprehension check. Next video, we will dive into more specific factors in the forest. We'll display what climate change is predicted to do to forests and why this matters to people. See you next time.